in the documentation, it doesn't talk about the VOLTTRON central platform agent. So I'm wondering, is that like an old sort of that's no longer considered to be useful, because it seems to start up something, and I'm wondering what the VOLTTRON, my understanding of the VOLTTRON central platform agent is it's more or less a router for the VIP bus to the VOLTTRON central agent, and I'm just wondering, sort of what's BACnet doing in there, and if that's going to change to get rid of it, or if I have to still consider that when I'm setting up BACnet configuration.
The platform agent interacting with BACnet, you need the proxy agent.
Right. But there's some code there's also some code in the VOLTTRON central platform agent that does some BACnet stuff.
That might have been part of the UI in VOLTTRON central to do BACnet scans. So I don't think, yeah, if you're not using that, you shouldn't need the platform agent to deploy BACnet.
Okay. All right. So in other words, I don't have to worry about that. All right, great. Thank you. The final question I have is, unfortunately, the ASHRAE specification is not precise about a device responding to unicast on unicast. In other words, if a device gets a unicast, I mean, I've looked at the spec, and even in the 2020 spec, if a device gets a unicast packet, it can respond on the all points broadcast IP address, which is quadruple 255, right? And if it gets a packet on the subnet broadcast address, which is a subnet CIDR prefix with 255 as the last byte, it also can respond on the quadruple 255 address. And I'm working with some simulators, actually two simulators, one called Yabe and the other called, it's a thermostat simulator, and another one called from the Chipkin, which simulates a lot of different properties, and they both do this. So basically what happens is VOLTTRON can't see them. And I'm just wondering, I've looked at the backpipes, and I've looked at the script for grabbing the objects and object properties, and I'm still not got to the bottom of how that could be modified. But I don't know, maybe somebody has some insight about how to deal with this. I mean, the other way I can think of it is putting some kind of wrapper around the device that will change the addresses on the packets when they're coming in and out. But I'm wondering if anybody has if anybody's worked with these simulators or has any advice about other simulators that might be not so, not take the ASHRAE specification at face value and do something that nobody else does. So does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I haven't worked with those simulators. Anybody else on the call have experience with the BACnet simulators?
You're just trying to create like a fake BACnet device, and is that what a simulator would do?
Yeah, so I have a virtual box VMs running, and I want to run a BACnet device in one VM and then have VOLTTRON running in the other one and discover it and use it. And it seems that the two simulators that I have don't work with. Maybe if anybody has any experience with other simulators, or I don't know.
There's there's like another wrapper around backpipes created by another author called BAC0.
Yes, BAC0. I've also looked at that too.
You can create fake BACnet devices really easily.
Okay. I've only looked at it for doing controller type stuff where you want to find all the devices on your net, but I will look at BAC0 devices, and maybe that would be a good thing to use.
Yeah, if it's just for testing something like on a test bench.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, it's pretty simple. I'll I'll post something in the chat.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I've looked at their documentation. It looks pretty good, except much of the documentation is full of spelling errors, which and when they appear in the code,
Yeah.
you get code that doesn't work.
Oh, no.
No, it's yeah, so Christian, who developed, he's the developer. He's
Yeah.
from he lives in French Canada. I don't know if that give him any maybe English is a second language. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. So he's French Canadian, in other words. Yeah. All
Right.
right. Great. I will look at the BACnet devices and give that a try. That sounds like a better bet than trying to get shoehorn these other ones into it. I mean, I wish ASHRAE would clean up the spec and say that if you get contacted on a unicast address, reply on the unicast address. If you get contact on the subnet broadcast, reply on the subnet broadcast. If you get contact on the all points broadcast, reply on the unicast address from which the packet is coming. It's like, I don't know why they have this hole in there, but it's not precisely enough specified. So, all right, thanks. Appreciate the advice.
You know, like one thing that I was kind of thinking would be nice if so if we're like setting up some edge device in the building, and then SSHing into the remote edge device, like having some way to do like a BACnet who is through I know there's some like scripts like for VOLTTRON just to do like your discovery process, but I kind of think it could be improved for like the way that you can discover remote BACnet devices, not just like getting like the system up and running and like the BACnet proxy, but like just like discovering devices in a remote building, if that makes sense at all.
Through VOLTTRON or through the scripts?
Yeah, so just like the initial scripts, like in the repo, there's like a scripts subfolder and then some BACnet discovery scripts. I think that it could be like if we're updating the BACnet proxy to newer version of backpipes, like I think that could be worth glancing at too.
Yeah, I think. Well, and so Robert couldn't make the call today, but he had some ideas on some BACnet configuration improvements as well. So kind of thinking maybe that could be the topic of the next office hours, is let's deep dive into BACnet, and maybe we'll have a chance to take a look at what the implications of this new library are, or the new versions of backpipes are.
Yeah, there's a BACnet property in the 2020 version of the ASHRAE spec that called object list. Or no, wait a minute, object list and object property list. And this lets you get automatically, and it's basically a property that you can query for, and it lets you get the properties and the objects in a device. And I think that would, I mean, right now it seems with VOLTTRON you have to do the static configuration where you run this grab script initially, and then you write the configuration to a CSV file. And I think it would be good if it could be done sort of on the fly, and you can like have the configuration run without having to. I mean, you might write the file out as part of the configuration, but it would be good to have it as like part of the platform driver to when it comes up, it searches for devices and then writes the script out rather than having it be a separate script. I mean, maybe there's a reason for it being a separate script, but I'm not sure why it was done that way, but it seems like it might be more convenient to just have it be part of the process of getting up a VOLTTRON instance on a BACnet devices. So
yeah, so what's the so you install VOLTTRON and you're going to be working with BACnet, so just as part of the initial startup it goes off and checks for what devices are available.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and then it would, and also what objects and properties are there as sort of kind of an auto configuration step. And I mean, you might want to write them out but I would really suggest using JSON. The CSV is kind of, yeah, and limit the number of configuration formats that you have to deal with.
Right. Yep.
But yeah.
No, that's all good. Yeah, and we were discussing with Robert, who maintains the campus deployment here at PNNL, about what kind of UI would you want if you're configuring that.
Yeah, that's another. I mean, I haven't actually looked at the UI because I haven't gotten it up yet, but that's another good thing to consider. I would imagine, yeah, that would come with. I mean, it depends. I don't exactly. I mean, I use the UI that comes up for VOLTTRON Central, and I would imagine it would come off of that somehow. But
yeah, either that, or you could have a local UI. I guess it depends. What's the use case for the deployment? How are you doing it?
yeah. I think if you're doing a multi-tenant service, it probably would be a separate resource, URL off of the VOLTTRON Central. If you're doing just a one-off sort of local building deployment, then it might be just based on the local platform.
Yeah. Well, and another thing we talked about is if you had a RESTful endpoint for all the VOLTTRON instances that you have out in the field, if you could hit that to do some of this configuration as well.
Yeah, that'd be another good one to do. Yeah, I mean, that would actually be even better for the case of a multi-tenant service.
So has Shweta talked to you by chance? So we're trying to talk to folks in the community about different deployment strategies.
Right.
And so I think having
she has not.
Okay.
So yeah. So I basically have VOLTTRON running in Kubernetes. I have it connected up to a post SQL database deployed in a cluster. You could also potentially use one using Amazon RDS or something like that. And I also have right now I have one. I have the ability to open up a port, an interface, a network interface on the pod directly into the local subnet. So if you want to do broadcast, you don't have to deal with the layers of proxies that Kubernetes has, which in most cases are good. But if you want to do broadcast, you need to have direct access. So that's what I'm working on now, is trying to get BACnet up so that I can run a BACnet controller pod in the Kubernetes cluster, and then have it discover devices out in the local subnet, and that way you can communicate back up to the VOLTTRON Central instance up in the. And I'm planning on using Cluster API to do the configuration, which is a Kubernetes cluster configuration tool, and I'm going to run one node in the in Azure and the other node on my local VirtualBox machine, and probably use WireGuard VPN between the two, and that way I can sort of simulate having a multi-tenant service for doing BACnet device management. And where I'm stuck right now is on the getting the BACnet instances at devices into VOLTTRON, and so that's what I was asking about today. But no, I haven't talked to Shweta about it.
Yeah, no worries. I'll shoot an email out.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, and I see Robert hopped on. I told him there was BACnet discussions.
Go.
Yeah, Robert.
I'm here. I'm multitasking, so I'm listening. If there's any questions, I will try to answer the best that I can, and otherwise I'll just let the conversation carry on.
Yeah.
One question, like I think James, you were saying something about platform driver or the master driver agent that
Yeah, the VOLTTRON Central Platform agent, which looks to me like it's basically a router for the VIP bus back to the VOLTTRON Central instance. But there's also this BACnet code in there. It's not mentioned in the documentation, but if you look at the code, you can see it. And I'm just wondering, Robert, if you could give some insight as to why it's there and whether I would need to be concerned about it at this point.
I'm sorry, what is there?
So
The BACnet
in the
code. Go ahead.
in the platform, in the VOLTTRON Central Platform agent, there's code in there that's part of the that BACnet UI that was built into VOLTTRON Central a while ago. But you don't ever use that interface though, do you?
No.
Oh.
Not particularly. I basically use the scripts and the like. So I have used it a couple years ago, but not in some time.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like it's basically old code that is now no longer used.
So I don't think
Go
you
ahead.
have to worry about it for
Yeah, okay, yeah.
what you're doing.
All I need to be concerned about is the platform driver agent and the BACnet proxy. So the other question is, do I have to have a BACnet proxy if all of my devices are on IP network, or is that just for MSTP?
It's all BACnet devices.
Okay,
You actually need a separate proxy for each BACnet network as designated by a UDP port.
okay. And can I have that run on the same network interface as my, as the platform driver is running, or does it have to be on a separate network interface?
It actually doesn't matter because the platform driver doesn't connect to the network interface. Only the BACnet proxy does. So the
Okay.
BACnet proxy sets up, it binds to that network interface,
Uh-huh.
and for each BACnet network, it binds to a different UDP port.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So basically it's going to do the 47808 for one, and then it's going to do 47809 or something in a different one, I guess. Okay. All right. I think I've got it. Thanks. I really appreciate the help.
Yeah, the only thing to keep in mind really that's of significant, I guess, kind of importance when doing the communication with these different devices
Mhm.
is that if you have BACnet routing enabled, it'll find the appropriate devices, on your network.
Mhm.
If you have a really large campus with separate VLANs and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and they've disabled BACnet routing, which is typical for these campuses,
Yeah.
you'll have to be on the same subnet. Your VOLTTRON node will have to be on the same subnet to get to the serial devices.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the only thing that we've had issues with on our campus is when we
Yeah.
communicate with the devices.
Yeah, okay. I mean, my current configuration is dead simple. It's just basically there's two VirtualBox VMs on a local network, and there's a BACnet device simulator running in one, and there's VOLTTRON running in the other. And but yeah, I'll keep that in mind going forward.
Okay. Any other BACnet questions?
James, I posted that link on the chat.
Yeah, I saw the link for your the fake device, fake BACnet.
I think there's someone else on there who has a question too.
Yeah, Joe had a question.
Hey, can y'all hear me right now?
Yep.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thanks. So this is my first meeting. Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Thompson from Epri. And I recently, I had some kind of I was on the periphery of a VOLTTRON deployment at one point, and we're doing a project right now where I think it's very simple compared to what I think VOLTTRON is being used for by many of y'all. We have a residential energy storage unit at a test facility, and we're basically looking for a way to do some Modbus control of the system. So it has Modbus points that we can read and write to control the battery. And we want to run some little control algorithms on the side. And we had been developing our own Python-based Modbus controller, but I was reading through some of the documentation for VOLTTRON, and it seems like that's some functionality that might be kind of already built into what you guys already have. So I guess I was hoping that maybe, I'm looking through documentation now, but it would be great to maybe pick some of your brains about, even if it's just some kind of keywords to look for in documentation of maybe the agents to use or the parts of the project that I might have to develop myself. But we have the energy source system that we essentially want to collect data from via Modbus, probably send the data back to a database that we have at the enterprise level. We want to be able to run control of the battery in various ways. So someone just posted the Modbus TK driver.
Yeah. So
thanks for that. So I don't know, any thoughts on that, or
sure.
Just keep looking through the documentation and come back in 2 weeks and talk to y'all then, or what do you think?
So it sounds like you would use the Modbus driver to connect to the battery. That would be publishing data onto the message bus. If you wanted to store it to a database, you could use one of the historians, and that would send it to whichever database you wanted. And then if you were going to write some controls, you could then extend the create an agent to do some work on the VOLTTRON instance as it's collecting data.
Hey, I'm sorry, I lost you for a second. My freaking headset just started talking to me. I basically lost everything you said after I stopped talking.
No worries.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. And I can send a follow-up email as well.
Okay.
But basically, so you'd configure the Modbus driver to talk to the battery.
Mm-hmm.
That would start pulling data from the battery and putting it onto the message bus. If you installed a historian, then that could write it to a database. And then if you wanted to develop some controls or some other logic, then you could implement an agent deployed in VOLTTRON to interact with the data that you're collecting.
Okay, yeah, and I guess right now I'm looking at what exists now in like the services/core directory. So it seems like when you mentioned this thing about historian, right? So there is some inherent functionality built into VOLTTRON already. So I just need to read the documentation to sort of, like you said, deploy a historian, meaning to sort of configure it, I guess, in the VOLTTRON space, maybe set up my own Postgres database or something like that. Is that along the lines of? Okay.
So, and the historian has some capability to, if you have an empty database, can set up the schema and all that for you. So yeah, so you should be able to get going. I'll send you the historian link here.
Yeah, that'd be great. I appreciate that. I think it helps to just hear that it seems like something within the wheelhouse of VOLTTRON, and so it's not a dead end essentially for me. But I think it'll be really helpful. Yeah, we just installed it on a little Raspberry Pi, and I think we're gonna try to go from there.
Okay.
And see how it works.
Sure, just let us know.
Yeah, we actually just deployed or had a battery system, lithium-ion battery system installed on one of our buildings, and it's integrated with VOLTTRON. And this week we actually validated that we're able to remotely through VOLTTRON do the controls on the battery and tell it to do a variety of different things, and then collect the data and store the data. So
Nice.
we don't have a lot of experience with Modbus devices. We have certainly used them, and this is another instance of that. But hopefully, as we use this more and get more exposure with the Modbus and Modbus TK driver, we'll be able to support those a little better, because typically our previous deployments have been mainly with BACnet devices.
Okay, so the battery that you're communicating with now, what are you using for that?
Modbus. Modbus.
Yeah. Oh, it is Modbus. Okay, great.
Yeah, it's a little bit more. It's a little more difficult to configure, but it is working pretty well. There are some some certain definitely differences between it and BACnet, as far as, you know, BACnet being peer-to-peer and allowing you to do some like auto discovery and auto generation, whereas with Modbus, you're really reliant on the vendor telling you exactly what's in each of the registries.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm a little more familiar with Modbus, but I mean, this is really fascinating to hear you guys talk about all these other, you know, I guess options or things that exist. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I need to drop off in a second, but yeah, thanks for the heads up. I'll be here in 2 weeks and hopefully have some more pointed questions at that point.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks. Perfect.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay. Let's see. Any other questions or comments? So BACnet configuration was a topic we were also talking about before, Robert.
Right. So Robert, I think the ASHRAE 2020 spec has you can do a read property for object list and object property list. In the first case, you give it a device identifier. In the second one, you give it a object identifier. And I think it might be possible. I mean, right now there's a separate grab configuration script. And I think that one thing would be possible is to have the platform driver or some other entity, maybe the BACnet proxy, do auto configuration without having to run that script. And I mean, maybe write it out to like a JSON file just to keep the number of formats to minimum instead of a CSV file. So yeah.
So what you're saying is that basically you configure the driver with like a device ID, and then it just gives you all the data?
Well, or you could do who is IM, and it could you get it back. You get back the device ID, right? If there was like, you know, 4 different devices with different IDs, you get back the ID for each one, and then you could do a read property to the device for the object list, and then it would come
Yes,
back with.
so that's kind of what we've been discussing as we walk through what this UI would do, or if we had a UI, how it would incorporate some of these tools to basically allow you to do some of this type of stuff where you could auto, it would basically streamline the discovery and configuration process and allow you to kind of set it up like that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I mean, I don't know what your discussions were in terms of the architecture, but I encourage keeping a nice separation between the UI and the you know, the property. So there's an API between the you know, JSON or REST API between the UI and the whatever agent is doing the configuration. All right, because otherwise you can't repurpose the configuration for different kinds of setups. Like if you want to run a multi-tenant configuration, you want to do it from separate UI displays. It'd be hard to you know, hard to do that, right?
Yeah, so communication would, I guess, between like whatever web service or web interface that was, if we created one, would either be through RESTful or through JSON RPC.
Yeah,
is my guess. And we would still have the standalone scripts or something like those for use, because I'm never, I would use the web interface if it was very friendly for like management stuff.
right.
That would be helpful. But typically I'm quicker, I'm faster just using the scripts currently. So
Yeah.
if we had everything set up and there was a real benefit to like monitoring and reporting that we could do through the web interface, I also think that would be great, and that would give me a good reason to you know, to exercise it more.
Okay.
And one of the things that we've had to think about is, because when you do stuff like what you're talking about, or what we have, where you say, okay, auto generation, auto configuration, and then it can pull in all these points, and then we can start, you know, doing some of that. Here on our site, we have a lot of buildings.
Yeah, right.
And so we have to be careful about that, because if we just said, hey, here's all the devices, now go and grab all the points,
Right, right.
we're probably going to have millions and millions of points.
So do you run like one VOLTTRON instance for the entire campus, or do you have like separate instances that are sort of federated for different buildings?
We have a central instance, which is kind of a hub for data collection.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have typically one separate machine per building,
Mm-hmm.
with a few exceptions where we have machines that are either doing a set of buildings that are kind of related to each other,
Mm-hmm.
or a building and some accompanying devices that aren't in the building but serve that building.
Right.
So it's kind of each of the VOLTTRON instances kind of represent one building, and they're somewhat islanded except for connection through that hub, which is our database hub.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And it's all running on basically on servers. You're not running in any sort of cloud VMs or anything like that.
They're all of the central hub is on a VM. It's institutional supported, so it's
So it's a private cloud basically.
yeah. And
Yeah.
then the actual building nodes,
Mhm.
they are actually single board computers, and we've used a variety. When we first started the project, we had, I want to say, a ton of different vendors and boards that we tested out to ensure, compatibility, and that we could basically do this on any of these single board computers. As that became less and less important, and then we kind of tested and verified, hey, if you can run a modern Linux operating system, then you can deploy VOLTTRON pretty much without fail.
Right.
Then we've kind of shifted towards a little bit more standard computer, and we've used the Intel NUC or NUC, and we've had really good success with those. They're pretty performant, and they're not too expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good choice.
I think that the last, we have some that are probably as low end for smaller machines that are, I want to say in the $150 to $250 range. And then we have some really, really nice NUCs that are probably, with memory and RAM and all that stuff, are probably in the $600 range.
Yeah. I mean, another nice thing about the NUC is, unlike the Pi, you don't have to worry about storage. The Pi, the only thing you use with the Pi is an SD card, which is kind of inconvenient.
That's not necessarily true. We do have some people that have hooked up SSD through, I can't remember if it was USB to SSD or what connection they use, but they actually do have an SSD attached to their Pis.
Right.
But it was an additional cost, right? You buy the SSD and then you have to buy the connector.
Right.
So I mean, and
Yeah,
what we really got to is the time and labor that we spent potentially troubleshooting or dealing with some of these issues that the Raspberry Pi gave us we completely offset that by that was greater than the cost of the additional hardware for a NUC.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that can definitely come up now and then. Yeah.
So
Great.
if we had to troubleshoot something for, for a couple hours a week, or 3 or 4 hours a couple times every 6 months,
yeah,
we'd have already paid for upgrading all of our boards to NUCs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, the NUC is pretty standardized, and like you said, the low end isn't all that expensive. So
yeah, I've been really happy with them. They've given us a pretty reliable machine. In general, I've only had a couple of failures. We had one that was collecting probably 2,500 points, and it ran for over 5 years,
Huh?
and we did hundreds of experiments on it
Mhm.
and had a lot of reads and writes with, you know, the log files and different SQLite databases that we were keeping temporary data.
Mhm.
And it was eventually the hard drive on that guy that failed.
Yeah, right.
And then
Yeah.
we did have one other board where it failed. It was a less used machine, but the actual motherboard failed.
Okay.
So it's two NUCs that we've had fail in probably you know, 7 or 8 years of doing this research.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I don't want to monopolize the conversation here. If anybody else wants to talk, I'll just sign out and.
Oh, no worries. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, then I think we're good if there's nothing else. So it sounds like having another BACnet session at the next office hours might be worth doing, maybe talking about setup and how to improve that. And maybe talking about the new version of BACpipes.
Definitely agree.
Okay. All right. Well, then thanks everybody for coming on. And if you have any suggestions for other topics that you'd like to hear discussed, or if you want to present the work that you're doing, that's especially interesting and useful to hear. Make sure that we're supporting the use cases in the community and gives the community a chance to see what each other's doing and look for opportunities for collaboration. So if you got research that you'd want to discuss, or potential research, doesn't have to be something that's done, then that would be a definite interest. So, all right. Thanks everybody for getting on. We'll talk to you all later. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.